Welcome to Mapping the Self. I'm Selena Garofino. Know thyself was carved into stone at the entrance of Apollo's temple at Delphi in ancient Greece. Scholars, poets, philosophers have debated the big questions around what it is to know yourself for thousands of years. I invite you to join me for conversations with artists, creators, scholars, spiritual teachers, writers, and humans of all walks of life to discuss these big questions together, to engage in a dialogue around what it is to live fully, to map ourselves, to know ourselves, to grow our compassion and listening, and to explore together our highest possibilities. Welcome. Welcome back to Mapping the Self. Today, I'm super honored to have my coach, Travis Davison, on. Travis is a third-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He's the vice president of SBG International, which is currently celebrating its 30th year, and the father of 4 children, 2 of whom are also black belts in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Is Stella also black belt in judo?
She is. She's a black belt in judo and jiu-jitsu. Yeah. Judo first.
That's amazing. And also owns a construction company called Iron Star Store. Oh, shoot.
Iron Star.
Iron Star Construction. I'm off to a good start today. I'm leaving that in there. Keeps it real.
Yeah, people like honesty.
They do. Thank you for being here, Travis.
You bet.
This show is about self-mastery and how we cultivate self-mastery and what that means really practically, as well as some people have had more esoteric discussions around self-mastery. Everyone that's been on so far are sort of spiritual teachers or yoga teachers or pastors or writers. And I just think it's really interesting to bring someone on that has achieved such a level of mastery in another skill that is so mind-body oriented, as well as I think has a spiritual component. So what does self-mastery mean to you?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
And I think it's, for me, I think it's just maybe not a attainable goal, but just a constant process. I think the biggest thing for me when I think about self-mastery is I think about things like discipline, consistency, but then also, gratitude and grace, both with others, but then for yourself as well, because if you're going to master anything, we know it's going to be thousands and thousands of hours. And I think that the hardest thing for most of us is just showing up, continuing to show up, not giving up, because life's hard. Whether you're trying to master your relationship with your wife or, become the best parent you can be, or, become, a master at jiu-jitsu or, yoga or whatever. It's going to take a lot of hours, and there's going to be, pits and stuff. And so if you can give yourself grace and recognize that you're not perfect and that we'll never be perfect, I think it's a lot easier. Your low points in life don't feel as terminal or fatal when you start to be a little bit, gentler and kinder to yourself, and see that you're doing your best and you are showing up and you are getting better. Maybe not at the rate that you would like to, and all of that, but I think if you can let go of some of that stuff, you're more likely to keep coming back. Yeah. But I haven't mastered anything yet.
I don't know if any of us really have. Even the 10,000 hours of mastery, like what is the bar that decides you're a master?
Yeah. Well, jiu-jitsu is a great example of that, because it'll be 24 years this December that I've been training jiu-jitsu. And if anything, I think it becomes even more elusive. The more you understand it, the better you get at it. You start to realize just how nebulous it is, and that there's always more learning to be had. And there's always other people that are further down the road than you are. But as long as you keep coming back to it, I feel like it takes care of itself. And I also try not to get too hung up on, comparing myself to other people, not just in jiu-jitsu, but in life. And it was always told me that we shouldn't compare ourselves to others. And I didn't quite understand that sentiment until recently. And just in the sense that with my students, I see them do it all the time. Like they're always like, they never look introspectively at themselves and say, hey, is Selena better at jiu-jitsu today than she was 6 months ago? It's always, well, she keeps beating me, or how come he got his belt and I haven't got my belt? And that's just, it's completely backwards because there's so many factors. Like if we were to put our value on ourselves based on how we measure up to other people, it's silly. Like it's just not, it's not a good way to do it. So I try to remind my students and myself, hey, are you better today than you were last week?
Yeah.
Right. And, and I feel like I was having coffee with my dad, who is head of construction at Iron Star. And we have coffee every Wednesday morning, and he's 70. And he said, I'm still changing.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, because it never stops. Like I think for as long as we're alive, there's this goal that we're trying to achieve perfection. And then we get as close to it as we can, and then it's over. But until we're dead, we're not done.
Yeah.
So
I really like that, because not comparing yourself is part of the kindness. I was going to ask you, for you, how do you practice that kindness towards yourself? Because I think this is something that gets spoken about a lot in counseling and in coaching and all these things people speak about. Just be kind to yourself along the way, have more grace for yourself. But I think a lot of people don't know what that actually means. And I have my practices, but I'd love to hear how you practice that.
Yeah. So a lot of this is still new for me. Like I said, I'm still trying to be a better person today than I was this weekend, and then a better person tomorrow than I am today. And I think the thing that helped me the most, people tell you all the time, oh, don't take it personally. And it's like, well, how do you not take it personally? Like, you're in a relationship or something happens, and our default setting is to blame ourselves. That's my fault. If I would have done this, or if I could have been that, or whatever. And the reality is that's not true. The only thing you can take personally is what you think about yourself, because that's truly the only thing that is personal, is how you feel about yourself. How other people feel about you, or how other people treat you, that's a reflection of them. That it has nothing to do with us. And one of the things that I had a hard time accepting was the fact that, we are responsible for everything. And it's our choice to let somebody make us feel something. I can't make anyone feel or do anything. I can't even make my kids do anything, right?
Yeah.
And nobody can. Like, none of us have a mind control machine where I can be like, use my words on Selena to make her act the way that I want her to act, or feel something I want her to feel. You get to decide, like, are you going to let the things that I say, like the feedback that I give you, you decide what sticks and what doesn't stick, but that's your choice. Like, I can't do that by myself. We have to give other people the power to do that. But unfortunately, we get pretty good at not letting other people make us feel that way. But then we turn around and do it to ourselves. Because I think we're we're our own biggest critic, and we know ourselves better than anyone else does. And so it's really easy for us to beat ourselves up. And, I am trying, like this phase that I'm going through right now is just trying to truly not take things personally. And when people hurt my feelings, or when they show up in a certain way, I listen to the feedback and I go, okay, so the stuff that kind of hits the engine compartment, the stuff that you feel, I take that seriously, because I'm like, well, maybe that's how I don't want to be showing up that way. And that's why it's affecting me. So what can I do to show up differently for people so that I can show up the way that I want to show up?
Yeah.
But then there's other feedback that comes in and you're just like, that's not true. Like if I said, hey, Selena, you're a green frog, you probably wouldn't feel anything. You'd just be like, I'm not a green, like, you're not a green frog.
Yeah.
But if I say something that hits closer to home, for me, I'll use myself, because I don't know what your hangups are.
Yeah.
But like if somebody says to me, man, you're showing up really insecure to me. I'm like, wow, because I am really insecure. So then maybe I need to take a look at that and go, okay, what is it that I'm doing that is showing up as insecurity? And then I have a chance to try to fix that. But at the end of the day, there's only one me, right? There'll only ever be one me. Like there'll never be another Travis. Like when I'm gone, there won't be another one. There's currently not another one on the planet right now. And so I look at that and I go, wow, that's amazing. Like I'm the only one of me ever.
Yeah.
And why did I even get a chance to exist? So instead of being hard on myself, I'm just sometimes in awe. Like, wow, like I get to be alive. Like I get to do this stuff, and that puts it in, I think, better perspective for me.
It does. Appa, my yoga teacher, Dr. Douglas Brooks, his teacher was this Indian man that we call Appa, which just means father. But Appa used to say, the universe went to all of this trouble to make you, do try not to be ungrateful.
Right.
And he would say it like very, very sweetly, just try not to be ungrateful.
Yeah. I mean, even when, we're in those dark places and dark moments, and we all have that. Mm-hmm. I think I don't understand Buddhism very well, or a lot of other spiritual teachings and stuff. But I think what you find in almost all cultures is that suffering is unavoidable.
Yeah.
Like I don't know any spiritual leader or religion where that's not part of the basic tenet, that none of them tell you, believe this, do this, and there'll be no suffering in your life.
Right.
And so we know there's going to be suffering. What's hard is, how do we not let that suffering just rob us of all of the wonderful things? And so I often find myself praying in the shower usually. And I try to pray that gratitude towards the things that are awful in my life. Like, thank you, God, for letting this happen to me. Yeah. Thank you for this, because I start to see what the power of the suffering was, and what the learning from the suffering was. And I see it as an opportunity to be better, not worse. And I used to try to avoid suffering. I used to think like, okay, well, the idea of life is, get good enough at being smart, at, being a good person, at communicating, at fighting, at whatever. And then eventually you won't experience mistakes and failures and suffering.
Yeah.
But that's just
it's not true.
It's not true. So I think the best thing we can do is figure out how to accept that as a fact.
Yeah.
And then, be as unaffected by those things as we can, because you know, often with humans, myself as an example, when we get into that depression or that woe is me, or why is this God? Why are you doing this? It's the wrong question.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times that leads to more bad behavior.
Yeah.
So you're already not getting what it is that you want.
Yep.
And then you start acting in self-destructive ways that actually get you more of the same.
More suffering.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, your brain will do backflips to answer whatever question you ask.
Mm-hmm.
I tell my coaching clients this all the time. I learned it from my coach. Backflips to answer any question. So if you say, why am I such an awful person? Your brain will do backflips to answer it.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask why, it's going to, it's about the past. It's a past question. And years ago, I had a pastor named Graham Cook when I was young that said to me, why is never the right question. It's what can I be right now that I couldn't in any other moment? How can I experience love right now in a way I couldn't have before? And to do exactly what you're saying, which is to ask the question of like, how can I show up now in a way that wasn't possible before because I didn't know this level of hopelessness. So now I get to be hope in a new way. Like, what does that look like?
Right. And I think that's, that's another important thing to remember. And is, the past is dead. I refer to it as like dead days. But how many times do you suffer in the present and feel miserable because you're dwelling on something that's already done? For me, that's probably the, half of my frustration is with things that I can't do anything about.
Yeah.
Past mistakes, past hurt, past pain. And I think that's where grace and forgiveness comes in, because if you can't forgive people, then you continue to be hurt in the future by past pain, which just doesn't make any sense. But we do it. I mean, I shouldn't say we, but I do that all the time. I let myself hurt in the present for something that happened in the past that is done. Like it's gone. Like you can dwell and dwell and dwell. Like, why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to me? I'm like an investigator. So like I try to put the pieces together, like, well, what were they thinking? Or what was she doing? And wanting to understand.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to understand. Like it's gone. And it's also, it's easy to say, I'm sorry. And it's easy to tell people it's okay, I forgive you. But to truly forgive, I think, is one of the hardest things that human beings can do.
For sure. Yeah.
So.
And there's a lot in there.
in that same vein, being offended.
Yeah.
Right? Like we choose to be offended, and usually it's little things, but we pick all the offenses up, and then pretty soon we're in a prison. Like we've basically built a fence out of the offenses.
Yeah.
And now, that we end up lonely and frustrated and all these, horrible emotions, not realizing that we made a choice to allow that thing to happen. Whereas instead, I offend people all the time, not because I want to or because I'm a bad person. That's how human beings are. Yeah. And I get offended all the time, but I can decide whether or not that I'm going to hold on to it.
Yeah.
Right. And holding on to it doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
Right. And yet I think most of us are guilty of that. We're guilty of, carrying around this like knapsack and then just like picking up every offense and putting it in the backpack and and then we're carrying this, heavy load. and we're hating people and we're not liking people, and we end up miserable.
Yeah. In Chinese medicine, they call the place between your shoulder blades the sea of forgiveness. And I jokingly call it the frozen tundra of resentment, because you look at everyone like rounded forward and hunchbacked, and the literal physical burden on the back of the body, and the way that like it's a backpack and the way it shows up. And for me, I feel like offense is often places like when I get offended, it's usually, I always investigate it because it's where I've attached my identity to an idea. And so when you criticize the idea, you're criticizing me. And that's always a really good place of investigation for me to pause and go, why have I attached my entire identity to this idea, to this thing? Because that's usually where it is. And then when that gets prodded at, we take it so personally, to bring it back to your earlier point. And it's a good place to practice shedding of like, that's not actually who I am. That's a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I was lifting with Alex, and we were talking about that. And it happens a lot in our society now. Like it's everything is so binary, and it's just like everything's an absolute, and it's black and white, and we don't have discussions with people in an honest way where I want to know why you believe what you believe, and listen to you. I want to convince you why you're wrong, and why I'm right. And then it's like we don't leave that conversation until we feel like we've convinced the other person.
Which never happens.
No, it doesn't.
Everyone's just angry, and then there's a rupture in the relationship.
Yeah, and nothing comes of it. And so, that's another. I'm 47, and up until probably 12 months ago, I was so judgy and opinionated, and so convinced that I could speak in, always, never, and then I was like, wow, like I was so wrong. And then I think about how many missed opportunities to have really good, meaningful relationships with people that could have enhanced my experience, my life. And I never gave them an opportunity.
Yeah.
Because I decided, like, well, I know what they're about, or based on how he looks or what he drives or whatever. I have a whole thing in my head that tells me what type of person they are. And that's so short-sighted, and it robs us from experiences that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I've, over the last 6 months, I've gone away from this idea of you have to earn my trust. Yeah. Because that was my thing. It's like, well, of course I don't know you. Of course I don't trust you. Well, it would be just as easy for me to say, I trust you because I don't even know you. You haven't done anything to make me think I can't trust you. So just shifting your mindset from an attitude of, I don't trust anyone until they show me that they can be trusted. And instead, I'm going to trust everybody until they show me they can't be trusted.
Yeah. Which is a very different thing, because that armoring of you have to prove to me that you're trustworthy, there's no gateway to even start a relationship with anyone.
Correct. And that's what
you're unapproachable.
You're missing out on all these experiences that you could be having, but you're making decisions that limit and keep you small, because now you never get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And that's, it's, on the one hand, it's sad and embarrassing, like to be 47 and be like, wow, like, wouldn't it have been, this is the kind of stuff that I probably should have learned as a kid. And now I'm having to go back and relearn all this stuff at 47. And it's like, I'm grateful that I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
But it's hard not to think I should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah.
But again, dead days.
Well, and a lot of these are these tools that we have now and that are becoming popularized and we're all accessing, our parents didn't necessarily have those tools. Like some of this is generational shifts that are happening, in my opinion, that I'm watching, and just conversation I've had with my own parents and the process they're going through now in their healing journeys and their growth. And there's just things that their parents didn't have and didn't give to them. And there's things we know about psychology now. And, as a society, as much as there's all that binary division and stuff, there's also a real rise in people being vulnerable and authentic and connecting and doing healing work and talking about it and talking about mental health in a way that we didn't before. And I don't know that we all had access to those things when we were kids in the same way.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't think we did.
Yeah.
I still don't think we really do, because, think about how absurd it is that there's no part of the education system. So when you're in kindergarten or junior high school or high school or even college, there's no one's talking about like emotional intelligence or mental health. And to me, I think that's a mistake, because
it's only happening in really wealthy, primarily white schools. Because it is happening. Like I have friends whose kids go to private schools, even in our community, where that is offered, but they're very small, expensive schools.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in public education. And so even that, it's like isolated to who gets to access mental health as a child.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why, like, when I started, shifting the way that I was thinking and trying to take responsibility for everything in my life, I realized, my kids were 18, 20, and 22. And I was like, I'm going to give this to them now.
Yeah.
Because now they're 27 years ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. But it required sending them somewhere and spending money.
Yeah.
But for me, it was worth it. Right. Yeah. But I just think, man, even if you just had a little bit of that in the public school system,
right,
what a difference that would make. Even like in our valley here, think about the number of high school suicides we've had in the last year.
Don't we? I believe, I would have to fact check this, but we have one of the highest suicide rates of 18 to 25-year-old males in the country too, yeah. I believe.
Yeah, that's sad.
Yeah.
That we don't see that as a big enough problem to, put some of these programs into schools, give kids some of these tools to, realize that life's a gift, and it's super short.
Yeah.
And we don't need to speed it up. Like, we don't need to speed up the process. Like, it's gonna eventually, we all have a expiration date stamped on us somewhere. We don't know what it is. And it's just tragic that young people would feel so hopeless and so overwhelmed that they would opt out. And, I hope, and I don't know what's being done in our schools here, but maybe, doing some of this training with kids and giving them the tools that they need to see that they even at the darkest, that they don't need to give up, that there are ways to get through it. And I never saw a therapist until I was 46.
Yeah.
And the reason I didn't is because I was like, well, I don't need a therapist. Like, there's nothing wrong with me.
Yeah.
As if taking care of your mental health is somehow a weakness, or there's something wrong with me, and the fact that I would feel embarrassed about that, or like I didn't need it, that's something that we're we learn that.
Yeah, that's a big cultural net. And just what you just said too, like for me, it was I had therapy younger, and I've been through all these coaching programs and these different spiritual traditions. And I still, when I was doing that work when I was younger, like 20s and early 30s, it was coming from a place of that I thought there was something super wrong with me. And I was pretty sure I was the biggest jerk on the planet and the worst person. And you can't develop yourself when all the personal development work you're doing is to get to a place of worthiness to receive love. Mm-hmm. Like it has to start from a place of that I'm already worthy. Because if you're trying to get worthy by doing work, it's like counterproductive. It's a spin. And if people, and a lot of that, I think it's that societal, that we're sold a brand and it's called happy. And so the minute that we don't have, like, we're taught by our media and stuff that we're supposed to be constantly running around on a dopamine, serotonin high and always be feeling good. And so then when we feel bad, we immediately fall into judgment, thinking there's something wrong with us. And then we start trying to correct it or to numb out or to fix it. And there's nothing to fix. It's just the waves of life. It's just human and it's innocent. And we're not promised to be on a dopamine high all the time.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it is like, I remember being a teenager and you think you're doing something wrong when you see other people that are happy. Like, well, there's something wrong with me. And just that lesson of like, there's nothing wrong with you. This is the human experience. Anger is healthy and normal. Rage is healthy and normal. It's not when it's internalized, right? When it's responsibly expressed, it's healthy and it's not something to be running from. Like that alone would take care of so many of I wish someone would have told me when I was young that I wasn't supposed to be happy, which sounds so funny because I'm happy. I am a happy person, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I do. I know exactly what you're saying. And that's the challenge, right? Is to get to a point where you can be content and enjoy all of the experiences, not just the happy ones. Because we all love those happy moments, right? Like you meet somebody new for the first time and then they like you back and it's like, wow, like that you can't ever, like that feeling's like, but it's fleeting, right? Like it's fleeting. Like you can continue to try to recreate those experiences, but instead it's like enjoy them when they're happening and then also enjoy the times that those aren't the same feelings that you're having, And again, it goes back to the gratitude. Like if you can practice gratitude every day, then I think it's so much easier and better. Remind yourselves of the things that you have that you should be grateful for and be grateful for them. And then, I'm not saying you have to do what I've been doing, but then look at the things that you have that you don't want and the experience that you had that you didn't want and be grateful for those too.
Yeah. There's Zen Buddhist practices around meditating on like your own death of people you love. And it sounds really morbid, but it's not. It's about resting in the unknown. I'm not a Buddhist, but I have had a lot of experience with like Zen Buddhist teachings. And a big part of that is meditating on the unknown and learning to rest in the unknown because you never know. And then to bear witness, which is to bear witness and hold your suffering and the suffering of others, to like have a net of compassion that's large enough that you can sit in it and with it without it subsuming you. And then to take compassionate action out of that.
Human beings are not good with the unknown.
No. We like to categorize things so we can trick ourselves into thinking we're safe.
Yeah. Well, and I think the probably the worst emotion that we can have is fear. And usually that fear is somehow tied into an unknown.
Yeah.
Like we're
or projecting the past onto the future.
Yeah. And we're fearing something that hasn't even happened.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing. And trust me, I haven't been able to rid myself of that. But when I find myself being fearful of something, I try to remind myself, I'm like, okay, we're not supposed to fear. Like we're not supposed to fear. And I'm not saying what was a silly shirt? It's like, no fear or whatever. I'm not saying like I'm this like
we just lost everyone born after 1995.
It's not like a stuntman, reckless sort of. I'm not afraid of anything.
Yeah.
I'm going to take all these risks and throw caution to the wind. It's not being fearful of what people are going to think of you, or fearing somebody you love being taken from you, or we get so wrapped up creating misery out of what ifs.
Yeah.
Like nothing's even actually happened, but we create the feeling that bad things have happened, and they haven't. And there's no guarantee that those things that we're afraid of are even going to happen, but yet we spend all this time wrapped up.
And it triggers that we know now, like from studying the nervous system and the brain, and the mechanisms are not well understood. But when you sit and ruminate on the past, for example, it recreates the event in the body. So even though, and it's the same thing actually watching shows and whatnot, it stimulates your brain. Your nervous system does not know the difference between a real event and a false event. So sitting and ruminating over something that was painful recreates the entire chemical spike in the body and re-traumatizes you, like sitting and ruminating on it. And it's the same thing, envisioning and picturing a future that is painful is creating that chemical condition in your body. And we all know that when we sit and focus on things like that, our behavior starts to reflect it. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's not because we're manifesting it, like to use the new age terminology. It's just because you believe it. And so you're acting in accordance with that reality.
Yeah. And we all do it. And I don't have a cure for that yet in my own life, because I'm for sure guilty of, allowing something to trigger.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
it's human.
You see a certain person, or you see a certain vehicle, or you drive by a certain building, or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden you're right back in it. And it's exactly what you're talking about, where you truly feel all the same feelings you did the first time.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how to get rid of that, other than, like I said, instead of when I get triggered now, I'll try to, pray right at that moment. Like, oh yeah, thank you, God, for that experience. And, try to somehow take the negativity out of it and put some sort of a positive spin on it, so that I can avoid, having all the same sorrows and anxieties and things that resulted from the actual event, which is done and over.
Yeah. And
has already hurt me, and then not let it cause that future pain.
Yeah. I mean, it's not possible to do it maybe it is. I have found things like EMDR to be really helpful for that, for deep traumas that are associated with events. Like when I lost my spouse, and then my dad was literally in the same hospital room in the ICU. I had like a full traumatic PTSD response and couldn't go in to see my dad. And now I've done EMDR around it. I can talk about it. I can walk in that room. I can speak to the doctor, and there's not that flood of chemicals that I had, because it was to the point where I couldn't walk into the hospital if someone I loved was sick, because it would trigger like a full PTSD response. But for me, doing EMDR around that, I don't have that physical reaction in my body now. And so I think that's been really helpful in different somatic release techniques, because we know now that this stuff gets stuck in the body in a very tangible way. Anyone who's interested in that, The Body Keeps Score, or Peter Levine's work in An Unspoken Voice, like the way that we know now trauma very much physically ends up in the body. And now there's techniques actually to get it out, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, it's interesting because my counselor has been talking about that a lot, because she has somebody who comes into her office, I think once a week or maybe once a month, but that's it exactly what he does. And she speaks really highly of it. I mean, like, he can actually, without knowing your trauma or your background, can kind of tell you what your trauma is just based on your body.
Yeah.
So I mean, something I definitely want to experiment with.
It's pretty powerful. I mean, we know also that it creates epigenetic changes in the body. And so in very real ways, when you do that kind of release work, it changes your genetics. And it's so connected to our illness. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Gabor Mate. He was an MD and he's a psychologist. He's written a number of books, groundbreaking work on addiction. He wrote a book called Feeding the Hungry Ghost that's about addiction, and then one called When the Body Says No. And there's a new film about him called The Wisdom of Trauma. But they've been investigating the way trauma shows up as cancer and different things in the body. And he's done incredible work with people like autoimmune diseases, cancers, all kinds of things that have reversed when people were able to face the deep childhood and sometimes infant traumas they were carrying in their bodies. Because our bodies will literally start to turn again. Like it'll start to attack itself. When we're holding too much stress and too much pain and too much trauma. And that physical piece was left out of psychology for so long, and it's not anymore. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's, gives me hope, know, that, and just, watching the advances in medicine over my lifetime's amazing, and the technological advances. And so you look at that and it makes you wonder, where will we be, 40 years from now, as far as our ability to, identify things, correct things, and prevent things.
Yeah. I mean, imagine a generation of children that would have these tools from the time they were small. Because part of what we know now from Peter Levine's work of how trauma ends up in the body is often if an action isn't completed. So for example, when someone is attacked, if they don't get to finish like pushing their arm forward or stopping the car accident, that's when the trauma gets embedded in the system. I'm simplifying. For more information, I'll put the books in the show notes. But so if like you hunt, if you look at deer, they shake before they run away. I'm sure you've seen this. You hit an animal, it lays on the side of the road and vibrates and shakes, and then it gets up and runs off. So our bodies do a similar thing, but because we have these complex minds, we stop ourselves from, for example, shaking after an event. Or in the hospital, they're worried you're going to hurt yourself. So after like a trauma, they'll pin you down. And that actually is when the trauma gets embedded into the body. And so that's where a lot of this physical work. But imagine a generation that would know how to let themselves shake after an event and wouldn't resist it because it wasn't shamed. And then on top of that, had all these communication tools. And like, I'm very hopeful that there is a generation that is going to raise up, that is going to evolve this whole lineage.
Yeah. Well, I think that if we just look at, again, our recent past, I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic and to believe that, the next generation is going to be better than this one, and one after that's going to be better than that one. And, I think that that's how it's been.
Yeah.
And, even if you look at lifespan and things like that, or more importantly, like health span.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot to be grateful for and optimistic about going forward.
I agree. And I tell my friends when they're like, this kind of personal development work is exhausting and seems like so much work. And I'm like, yeah, but you get to practice being an ancestor. Like you're an elder and an ancestor in training, and you get to practice being an elder. Like every day my students laugh at me, but I'm like, I'm practicing dying with grace and becoming the grandparent, the elder that I would want in my own life.
Yeah. Well, it's, that's kind of our legacy, right? Like, I believe that everybody has a purpose. I think that for most of us, it's hard to figure out what the purpose is.
Yeah.
Right. But there is a purpose. Like we're here for a purpose, and I think finding that purpose and then embracing it also leads to a lot happier, healthy life and mental state. I think people that don't find a purpose or aren't looking for their purpose, it's easier for them to get bogged down in all the negativity.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much pressure now. I feel sorry for kids in their 20s, actually, because of the amount of pressure that somehow now having purpose is equated with like internet fame or with, do you know what I mean? Like instead of acknowledging like that you're a leader in your home and you're a leader in your community, and that doesn't, and that those things are more meaningful or just as meaningful, but there's like this strive towards this kind of thing that's out there and it's so disconnected from individual purpose.
I think you're right. And for me, the way I think about it is, I think kids used to want to be successful. But now I think
they want to be famous.
Correct. I think the confusion is now there's this idea of celebrity.
Yeah.
Like people want to be celebrities. They don't want to be successful per se. They want to be famous. And I think that's a mistake. I was talking to my coach on his podcast a couple of weeks ago, not specifically about Facebook or anything like that, but it came up and I made the comment. I was like, I never feel happier or better having scrolled through my newsfeed. Yeah. Like that's not an emotion that I experience, but yet, you're sitting on the toilet and it's like, oh, well, I guess I'll scroll through Facebook while I'm, doing this. And it's I almost never feel better.
Yeah.
As a result of it, and I think it goes back to that same thing. You look at that and you're like, well, why am I not happy? Why don't, pictures with people in relationships or pictures of people on the beach or, whatever. And it's just not real.
No, you don't know what's happening. I mean, we were just in Costa Rica at a camp and I was posting photos and I came back and everyone was like, you had the best time. And I was like, I was super sick, actually. And I started telling them things that were happening. I was like, you saw a picture of my feet on the beach, but you didn't see that I was like very ill all morning for several days and that I was struggling. And I had a friend going through a really big emotional thing. Like you didn't see any of it. You assumed I was having a great time because you saw the picture.
Yeah. And we all manicure what we want people to see, right? Like, that's a great example. Like, I think I posted at least one picture, like of an iguana or something. But it's like, we don't take pictures of the mundane parts of our life. We don't take pictures of the, sad parts of our life. Like we only, because we have the control over like, what do I want people to see about me? Well, I'm going to show them all the best parts.
Yeah.
Right. And then I think we start thinking that that's how everyone's life is all the time. And why isn't ours that way?
Yeah.
And
it's dangerous because we put people on pedestals like leaders, coaches, teachers. And it's not what people don't realize about putting even positive judgments are dangerous because you're putting someone on a pedestal that's unhuman. And then when they act like a human being, it betrays you and you're resentful. And I've been thinking about this a lot as a yoga teacher and a coach and whatnot. I do my best to be incredibly honest about my own struggles with my students because when I was young, I was always looking for a pastor or someone that had overcome being a human being. I couldn't have named that, but I was looking for it. And so then every time one of my coaches or someone had a human moment, I was so heartbroken and like angry at them. Like, how dare you be a human being and not have overcome the bullshit I'm going through, Yeah. And it wasn't fair to them and it wasn't fair to myself. And I think that this social media stuff does the same thing. It starts to make you think that there's people who have it figured out. And instead of like, we're all just humans trying to figure it out.
Yep. Yeah, that it's totally true. And I've definitely felt the pressure from that, just within, the little community that Keith and I have created where, we have 1,200 students now and, 4 locations in Montana. But then on top of it, I have 60 plus gyms worldwide and I'm somewhat known in that community.
Yeah.
And, when I go through a rough patch, like I've shared with a lot of our members and coaches, like this last 2 years of my life was like, man, that was the darkest time.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I've had to go back and clear things off with people and try to clear things up and move forward and leave some of that in the past. But, you know, because you're in this position and you do have influence on so many people and you are given some things that other people don't have, that you do have a higher level of responsibility.
Yeah.
And then when those moments come and, you know, the storms come and you're doing the best you can and you make mistakes, and it's even harder because you're like, wow, like you know, I'm a black belt in martial arts. Like I should, you know, that's not how martial artists behave. And, you know, and I'm a father and fathers don't behave that way. And, you know, I have the privilege of coaching people. Like people trust me to, you know, guide them in something. Like they're looking to me to teach them something. And then, and then you let them down.
Yeah. Well,
right?
And for our listeners that don't practice martial arts, like it's not just sports. Like it's not just a sport. Like when you play basketball, like people do put a lot of trust in their coaches, and martial arts are bigger than just a sport. It applies to your life. I don't really know how to explain it. You could probably do a much better job, but it's a big thing. It's a life thing. It's not just what's happening on the mat.
Yeah. I mean, I think what you said is right. And it's the way I describe it to parents too, when they're coming in and they're like, well, my son plays football, or, you know, my daughter plays softball, or, you know, they have these other sports. And I said, you know, the difference between what we do and martial arts versus sports, we don't have a season, right? This is a lifestyle. It's a year round. There's no season to it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is there's a life skill component to it. I mean, a very specific life skill component to it for the kids, but even with the adults, you know, we're constantly seeing the connection between what it is we're learning with the physical activity and how it also relates to the challenges that we face off the mat.
100%. And I'm very disciplined. Like that's not an issue for me. Like when people were like, oh, how do you do that all the time? I was a ballet dancer. I already cultivated discipline. That wasn't an issue for me coming to jiu-jitsu. Issues for me was like not having body sovereignty, like too much of an abuse history and not knowing how to like put up physical boundaries, saying no, like being able to say no, being able to not panic when I was in pain or there was big dudes around me. But just in the few months, and I wasn't even coming in looking for a goal around that. And then one day I was like, I have body autonomy now. And it happened like overnight. I mean, it didn't, but it felt that way to me. It was like one day I caught myself just really boldly saying no to someone like that. I'm not comfortable with that. And I was like, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, jiu-jitsu did that.
And it's different for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, I've been doing it for almost 24 years, and it was my first form of therapy. Right? I didn't actually see like a therapist until a year ago, but I always had jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
You know, I always had that. I like to talk to people at like extreme yoga.
Yeah.
Because I practiced yoga for a long time too. And I enjoyed it. But to me, it was harder to get into that flow state, or, you know, they talk about quieting the fluctuations of your mind.
Yeah.
And yoga, for me, that was a real challenge, because it's like, it's quiet.
Yeah.
And there's no one's trying to kill me.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to, you know, get into this pose better.
Yeah.
and my brain's just talking the whole time.
Well, and not everyone feels safe going into an interoceptive state, awareness of your interior space. Like that's a very dangerous place for a lot of people, especially if you have anxiety or depression. Like people always tell everyone to meditate, and it's actually not a great idea if you have high anxiety or you're going through depression, because it's going to make you more aware of those states, like something more open-eyed, where you, like in jiu-jitsu, if I quit paying attention, bad things happen to me. I'm a white belt, by the way, for those listening. Like I know nothing. As Travis once said to me, he's forgotten more jiu-jitsu than I've learned. But if I don't focus, something bad happens like pretty immediately. And so it pulls you into that meditative state of like present moment awareness really fast. So I can see where that would be really appealing for people that aren't able to quiet their mind.
Yeah, and that for me has always been one of the big benefits, because it's like a recharging, which also seems counterintuitive for most people, because here it is, you're coming in, you're doing an hour to 2 hours of fairly strenuous physical activity, but the funny thing about it is, because you're putting away your grocery list, because you're forgetting about the fight you had, because, your brain's able to rest while your body works for that hour or 2 hours, you come off the mat with more energy than you came into the gym with. And so then I've always found that I had the energy, but then also the attitude, where problems that I had when I came to the gym that I thought I couldn't solve or that were overwhelming, I will walk off the mat with this extra energy going, oh, I can figure this out. Yeah. I can make these phone calls. I can go talk to that person. So it's always been powerful for me as a form of meditation or therapy, whatever you want to call that. But back to what we were talking about before, with when we put people on pedestals or when we carry that weight, because oftentimes the person who gets put on that pedestal or who is in that position, they feel the weight of their responsibility, and then again, because we're not perfect, when we mess up, it almost feels worse than if nobody knew who we were.
Yeah, letting yourself down's one thing. Letting down 1,200 members or perceiving to let down all of those people is a much bigger burden.
Yeah, and again, it's inevitable. Yeah. Like we guard against it, strive to be better every day. And then, but also know that somewhere in the future, we're going to let somebody down. Yeah. And just, I think, being prepared for it, giving yourself grace, but also taking responsibility. Yeah. Because I find sometimes we get a little too woo-woo about, everybody messes up, and just don't feel bad about it. Be whatever. But the reality is we do have to take responsibility for our actions. Yeah. So when we mess up, we need to take responsibility for it. Yeah. Ask forgiveness, and then we need to show up
differently.
Yeah, because cliche but true. Actions, not words. Yeah. And if we're going to earn people's trust back, if we're going to actually have people be able to truly forgive us, they're watching. Yeah. All right.
And there might be restitution that has to be made depending on what the mistake was. Like there's steps involved in that. You don't take your dog in someone's house and it craps on the floor and then you go, sorry about that. And you just keep walking around their house, right? You're going to be like, do you have stuff for me to clean this up? Like you have to clean up your mess.
Yep.
On the way out.
Yep, you do. And it's, I wish it wasn't this way, but the reality is our actions do have consequences. Yeah. And it's not that we're being punished or that we're bad or that we should, carry this shame forever. Yeah. But it does mean that we did something wrong. We made a mistake.
Yeah.
And there are consequences for it. So we don't get to avoid the hard parts of making mistakes.
Yeah.
But if we take responsibility, we ask forgiveness, we change the way we're showing up, then we can move forward. Like we're not defined by our mistakes.
And you're not beholden to bring it all the way back to, it's not personal. You're not beholden to how someone perceives it after that.
Correct.
Because you can't control if someone's willing to see you differently or whatever. And as long as you are in integrity and alignment with yourself, that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cleaned up the mess and you've done everything you can and you are shifting, that's what matters.
Yep. Yeah, it's totally true. Some people will forgive and move forward. And then there will be people who you don't have to make everybody like you.
Yeah.
And it would be impossible to do that anyways.
Yeah.
Like there's nobody on the planet who everybody likes.
Yeah.
That's just not how it is. And again, going back to the not taking it personally, I think that's where it becomes important to realize that and say, okay, well, that's a window into how they show up.
Yeah.
That's not about me. That's about them and what they have. So
yeah. Yeah. And not interpreting things not being personal. Often it only took me 38 years to figure this out, but we all interpret people's words and behaviors through what it would mean if we said it or did it. And it's not necessarily what they said. And the biggest thing I've learned to ask people is, what did you mean when you said?
Mm-hmm.
And when you did this, what did you mean by that? This is how I experienced it. Is that what you meant?
Mm-hmm.
And giving people space, because I'm almost always wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a funny thing that I've only recently come to discover too, is just there's facts and then there's interpretation.
Yeah.
And I mean, you try to call somebody, they don't answer. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But then you interpret like why they didn't answer.
Yeah.
And then you find out later that they were, visiting their mom in the hospital or something else. But in your mind, you'd created this whole story of, well, they don't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
Or,
and then the suffering
that
floods in with the narration, with the story that you've created.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what the Buddhists have a lot to say about suffering that I actually really like. One of the things is the suffering of change, which is what you were already talking about, of not think, like anywhere that you think something's never going to change, they say you're setting yourself up to suffer because you're attached to it. That's what they're talking about when they talk about non-attachment. It's not that you don't love or that you don't care about things. It's that you're not holding on and clinging to it as never shifting. And then they call it the suffering of suffering when you sit in the stories around the pain. So it's like, can you feel pain without painting the world as painful? Can you be in anger without deciding the whole world is angry, instead of resting in that and then creating a whole story about it?
Yeah. All of it makes sense, but all of it's hard to do. Like
it's easy to talk about, isn't it?
Yeah. It's like in jiu-jitsu, it's like simple, but not easy.
Yeah.
Like these concepts, a lot of them are simple. Like when you hear it, you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like, why would I dwell on the past? Or why would I create stories around an event without actually knowing what was going on?
Yeah.
That seems simple to me.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to me. But in practice, it's not easy.
It's so hard. I have all kinds of little tricks I do now. Like when I catch myself spinning out in my mind, talking negatively to myself, I just put my hand on my chest, and in my head, I just say, stop. If I'm alone, I say it out loud and make it a little more visceral, like stop. It's like interrupting my own pattern. But I mean, I'll be in Costco with like my hand on my chest because I'm spinning out about something and I'm like, nope. And I've trained myself that when I'm doing that, I know what that means. It's like the dinner bell for the dog. Like I have little tools like that I use to like stop the train. We're getting off right here.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I've been trying to figure that out. Like I said, praying,
Yeah.
like just recognizing what it is that I'm doing and the patterns that I've created for myself and the habits that I've gotten into. Whereas in the past, I might get stuck.
Yeah.
And then not even just get stuck, but like jump into the mud. You know what I mean? Like just be like, how can I make this even more awful? How can I, ruminate on this and make myself feel horrible? So now, instead of that, seeing the onset and then being like, okay, I need to stop this before it becomes what it's always become in the past, which has never resulted in anything good.
Yeah.
And I don't want to keep having that same result. Right. So, something has to change, but, you said it early there too, that, change is hard and people don't like change, and it doesn't even matter what it is. It could be good change. And it's, people are used to you being a certain way, which is why people, your friends and stuff be like, I wish you didn't drink so much, or I wish you weren't so angry, or, they'll tell you all these things that they would like to see you change. And then when you start changing them, instead of being like, high five, Selena, like, that's awesome. Like I can tell that you've totally changed.
Yeah.
They resent it because
they're shoving the drink at you, or they're like,
because now they have to change, right? Because now the way that they perceive you and their perspective has to change, and that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess it's almost funny that you'll see people, encourage somebody to change. And then as that person starts to change and starts to, become a better person or a healthier person, and then all of a sudden the same people that wanted to see them change are like, not happy the way that you think they would be.
Yeah. Well, because we're all a mirror to one another. Like mirrors are not accurate. When you stare in a mirror, you're staring at your own foibles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the reflection you see is not correct. And it's why we need the cross-reference of another human being or of other people. And it's, one of my pastors used to say, it's the nature of deception to not know you're deceived. So you need a reflection from other humans. And so when you change, that reflection shifts, and most of us really love having people that are in the mud with us. So when somebody starts crawling out of the mud and they're staring back at you, that can be really uncomfortable.
Right.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I have a couple questions.
Okay.
We spoke about discipline early on, and obviously it takes a lot of discipline to get a black belt in Jiu Jitsu. For those that don't know, it's about 10 years.
That's pretty typical,
average. And I know just from watching, there's not very many people left that I started foundations with. There's a crew of us that are all friends and we started class together. And then there's the jokes in the jiu-jitsu community about get your blue belt and quit, So I'm sure you have something to say about discipline. And so I want to hear about discipline and also like, what is it? Because I'm sure it applies to other areas of life that makes people stay long enough to get a black belt.
Okay. So as far as what makes people stay, you have to love what you're doing. Like, I'm of the opinion that people can be really successful at anything that they're passionate about.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even matter what that thing is. Like growing up as a kid, I wanted to be an artist, but everyone, of course, is like, well, you can't make any money in art. Or, maybe some other kid grew up like carving skateboards in his garage, but, his parents were like, well, you can't make a living making skateboards or, whatever, fill in the blank. And I actually had that impression when it came to jiu-jitsu. So when I started jiu-jitsu, I was doing it because I loved the activity, but I never thought that I could love the activity and then actually make a career out of it.
Yeah.
Because it just, my mind, the way that my mind had been trained is, that wasn't possible. I didn't see those as possibilities.
Well, and when you started jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu is getting very popular now, but it didn't hold the place it did now. Like the UFC wasn't as geared towards it as it is now. Like, it was a different environment. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. But in hindsight, looking at it now, even then, we're capable of, making a living from whatever we want.
Yeah.
And so as far as sticking around to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu, John Frankel's fond of saying, you have to love jiu-jitsu more than winning. I think that's a big part of it because...
that makes tons of sense. I'm giggling thinking about, well, I haven't won anything yet, but...
well, but it's so true because if you're in love with winning, guess what?
Yeah.
You're not going to win all the time.
Yeah.
There's one person who's the best at the world at any given thing. Yeah. And if you're not that person, then guess what? You're going to lose occasionally.
Yeah.
So I think it's much easier to quit if you don't love the activity,
right? But
you love winning. So looking at it from that perspective, you have to be in love with jiu-jitsu. Like that's important. And then the joke about like people get their blue belt and quit. The reason I think that happens is people get kind of focused on a goal. And in jiu-jitsu, a lot of times it involves the belt system, right? Because you're going from white belt to blue belt to purple belt to brown belt to black belt. And so it's really easy to measure your value based on your rank.
I see.
Right?
Well, because I've been told we're not people. I'm just kidding. John Boone jokingly one day in Reno, he was like, Selena, white belts aren't people.
Yeah.
By the way, John Boone is lovely and he was joking.
Yeah, there's lots of jokes like that. But if the belt shouldn't be the goal.
Yeah.
Right? The goal is to learn jiu-jitsu, to understand jiu-jitsu, to be able to practice jiu-jitsu, to be able to teach jiu-jitsu. The belts take care of themselves along the way. But what happens is, oftentimes it takes 2 years, 2.5 years to even get to that first belt.
Yeah.
And so you get that belt. And if your coach doesn't reset your goals for you or encourage you to reset your goals, it's easy for people to feel like they accomplished something and now they can move on.
Right. They'll be able to tell people like, I did that thing, or just mentally close a chapter. Like, I succeeded. I got to a point.
Yeah. And it's, we forget that when we started jiu-jitsu, we started to become black belts. And it's not that we wanted the belt to be black. It's that we wanted the things that belt represents, which is an understanding of something that we love.
Yeah.
Which is jiu-jitsu. So I think the belts are great. They make it much better for competing and making sure that people are competing with people that are at similar level. I think they're a great extrinsic motivator for people. But I also think that they cause a lot of hardship for certain people too. I've seen it over the years. I see it over the years where people just get really hung up on that. And like, instead of being excited at an Ironman when some of their teammates are getting, promoted, they're actually, whispering about, how that person's only getting that belt because of this or that. And there's just this.
I submit them all the time. Why am I not getting it?
Yeah. It's just,
I can see that.
Which is unfortunate because I think we should definitely celebrate other people's achievements. Back to happiness, like we individually only get to celebrate so many things in our life. Yeah. And if we get in the habit of celebrating things in others' lives, then we get to celebrate more. Yeah. And so anyways, I kind of got off the topic there.
No, I think that's all relevant because like being able to celebrate, because all of this applies to anything, right? If you're overly focused on the end goal, that's a life thing. If you're overly focused on the end goal, you're going to get frustrated along the way when it doesn't go how you want it. And when the path doesn't go linear, and it never will, and not comparing yourself, that's helping anyone stick to anything. And you just spoke to community. Like, Travis has said this before the last black belt Ironman, actually, in our class. I remember one day we're like, the people that stick around, it's because they participate in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you just kind of touched on that briefly, but I think that's a big part, I mean, obviously of life, but of that journey too. Like if you're an island unto yourself, seeing things through is difficult.
Mm, yes. Yeah, that's the other, over the years, what I've witnessed is that people who fail to develop interpersonal relationships, whether it be with other coaches or other students, or they don't, participate in, events outside of the gym, whether it be, going to a local fight or going to a, in-house tournament or, getting together at the lake for, a potluck or something like that. Those people definitely don't stick around because there are going to be times when jiu-jitsu is hard and when it's frustrating and when you don't feel like you're getting any better. And, having those other relationships kind of get you through the low points.
Yeah, I mean, even it's fun. I was just in Costa Rica and people didn't know that I was in Costa Rica and they were like texting me, asking me if I was okay. Cause I'm usually in class 3 to 5 days a week, depending on if I'm injured, not from jiu-jitsu, but I just have body stuff and sometimes I can't train. But people were promptly asking me where I was and if I was okay. And I can imagine if you don't have that kind of community checking on you to be like, hey, we miss you on the mat. I was like, I'm in Costa Rica. I am on the mat. I'm just not on your mat. But people, I can imagine if you don't have people doing that, it would be easy to like fall in the crack or slip away. But I cultivated those relationships intentionally.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's the same, because like I was saying, I lift weights 3 days a week. And there's a huge difference when you have a lifting partner who, you wake up in the morning and you really don't want to go work out.
Yeah.
Like you would rather just stay in bed. But then you're like, oh, Alex is there.
Yeah.
I can't not show up. But then, that same lifting partner, if he's not going to be there and he's like, oh, I'm going to be out of town next week. It's way more tempting and on those days, it's a more of a struggle to be like, okay, you got to go in there and you still got to lift anyways. So in jiu-jitsu, having coaches that text you and call you, ask how you're doing, ask where you've been. When you have teammates are like, hey, are you going to be in class tomorrow? I was planning on going to this class. And, that helps a ton because we all, I think we all, experience burnout, in our lives. We just, there are times, there are just seasons in our lives where, maybe something else is going on and it's kind of taking the joy from, other parts of our life. And if there's nobody there to kind of give us a push or a shove or a hug or whatever, it's really easy to be like, I'm just not going.
Yeah. Well, and like with jiu-jitsu, it's not, I would be lying if I said it was fun every day. Like there's days when everything just feels like it's going wrong and I can't remember anything you've taught me and I'm frustrated and I'm hurting and like I'm just getting smashed and it's like it's not fun every day. And there's other days where I'm just getting annihilated and I don't care and I'm laughing my head off, but it's not easy every day. But really those days when it's hard end up being some of my most fruitful days when I look back.
Right.
Like those, not in the moment, but when I look back 2 weeks later, I'm like, I learned a lot those 2 weeks.
Yeah. So be grateful for the hard times too, right? Like, and remind yourself that. Be like, oh, today really sucked, but remember last time it sucked and I actually ended up learning more back then. And then if you can remind yourself, just like if you can remind yourself what it feels like to get off the mat, then it's easier to get on the mat because there are days that you just don't want to even go. Like you feel like you don't have enough energy or you've got too many things that need done. And you start making up stories and telling yourself excuses. And then inevitably the days that you were supposed to work out that you don't work out, you feel considerably worse about yourself and are less productive. And then on those days when you were able to somehow convince yourself to get on the mat, you got off the mat and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. So the trick is can we figure out a way to remind ourselves that because it happens to us all the time. And if there was a way to somehow, bottle up the feeling that you get afterwards, and then, take it on the days that you don't want to get on the mat, just to remind you what it's going to feel like when you get off the mat.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to keep you much longer. I've gone 20 minutes over than what I intended to, because you are just fun to talk to and you have so many good things to say. But I think all those things apply off of jiu-jitsu too for our non-martial artist listeners. Like, it's having community, having intentional accountability, people that like my other coach, Coach Michael, who's a very good friend of mine. I text him when I'm not coming to class because I feel guilty, even though he has never, ever guilted me once. It's just like, have people you respect that you don't want to let down. Like, even Travis, who's sitting here, I'm like, I have to go to class. Travis will what? And Travis is not like, where's Selena? She missed class today. But in my head, I'm like, I have to go to class. I can't miss class. Can't let my coach down. So having people that you really respect and are accountable to, having friends. By the way, I just read a study that people lift heavier when they're with a training partner than on their own. Like, by a significant percentage, they lift heavier weight.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me, because guess what? The days that I go in and lift by myself, like, you know what? I don't really feel like I don't want to do that much weight today. I'm just going to take it easy. You know what I mean? And if there's somebody there, it's like, well, he's going to tell me that I could have done more.
Exactly. Yeah. So accountability, and I mean, those things are all discipline too. And then really the importance of community, of not being an island unto yourself, and quick to rectify and keep short accounts with people and clean up your messes. I think those are all the things that are one of the ways in which we cultivate self-mastery and discipline. Do you have anything else to add, Travis, about anything?
No, I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope if anyone's interested in jiu-jitsu, they find somewhere.
Yes, somewhere to go.
And and if it's not jiu-jitsu, whatever it is, find it.
Well, I'd love to have you back in a future episode. Travis also has the Growing Gorillas podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have a podcast which is about parenting. I'm not a parent, so I haven't given a ton of listening, but I can imagine that there's some good stuff on there. I'm assuming they can find that on any listening platform.
They can, yes.
Yep. And there's also some great interviews with Travis on the SBG podcast with Matt Thornton, his coach, as well as you've been on Andy's podcast as well, right? On Cleared Hot.
About half a dozen
times.
Maybe more. Yeah, lots.
So you can also find Travis on Andy Stump's podcast, Cleared Hot, and lots of other places. So thank you so much for being here, Travis.
Thank you.